About the weather, because it is feared that parts of England are suffering the worst flooding in decades, with river levels looking likely to rise even further. There are still about 100 flood warnings in place, and it's communities along the Thames which are expected to be the worst hit. Let's just take a look at the situation right across the UK. The Environment Agency saying that there are currently 97 flood warnings in place. In England and Wales, that figure is for Dorset, Hampshire, Kent, West Sussex, Worcestershire and Gloucestershire. Lots of counties all at risk there. There are no flood warnings currently in Scotland or Northern Ireland. Insurers have warned that the cost of the damage will run into hundreds of millions of pounds. And forecasters say that although the downpours and severe weather have eased, the risk of flooding remains high, simply because of the amount of rain that has fallen in the last few weeks. Meanwhile, it's emerged that government plans to prevent new housing developments in England and Wales from adding to problems of flooding are facing more delay because of opposition from building companies. One town that's already experienced serious problems is Sunbury-on-Thames, and our reporter Fiona Irvine is there.
Yes, the river here is very swollen. You can see the floodwaters behind me. You can see the river running very fast. And the Environment Agency say that water levels haven't peaked yet. Around 100 flood warnings are in place across England and Wales. The majority of those are in the southeast. And communities in Oxfordshire, Berkshire and Surrey are being told to stay on high alert. Now, as people watch the river levels rise here, plans to force housing developers to put flood prevention measures in new homes are facing further delays. As our environment correspondent Roger Harrabin reports.
Does this look familiar? Not 2014, but 2007, the year of the Great Floods, which led to a government review, which led to the 2010 Floods Act, which laid down rules that developers should stop making buildings in a way that make flooding worse. The thinking behind the act led to developments like this.
It looks like a park, and it is, in southeast Sheffield, but it's also a smart drainage system to capture rainwater and prevent flooding. Normally, rainfall from new developments like this flows into the sewers, where it quickly swells rivers and makes flooding worse. Not here. The water's carried by pipe to this pile of rocks, where it seeps slowly into the ground.
Capturing water on the surface from this housing development, the pollution's removed because it goes through vegetation. It provides for biodiversity and landscape benefits for the community, but also providing that flood prevention by controlling the flow into the stream locally.
The house builders say that ponds like this take space and that costs money. They want to trap the water in giant tanks underground. The experts say the tanks will cause problems with maintenance and won't bring the wider benefits that a scheme like this offers.
County councils will do the maintenance, then charge people living on new estates an annual fee in place of what they'd otherwise have paid on their water rates. The government promised MPs to publish the rules by April this year, but this week it admitted it couldn't make that revised deadline. A spokesman said the government still intended to go ahead with the plans. Roger Harrabin, BBC News.
Well, just to give you a sense of the level of flooding here in Sunbury-on-Thames, behind me you can see poking out of the water there, that's a park bench. And if you go across to the river bank, you can see the trees there. That's the side of the bank. Those trees are normally above the water level. Earlier we saw two swans swimming past the park bench here. Although there's been a respite from the rain, that takes some time in this large Thames basin for rivers and tributaries to feed into the watercourse. So that's why there are still flood alerts in place around the Thames basin. People here are sitting, waiting and watching the river levels rise and waiting to see if it will cause any more serious flooding.
All right, thanks very much for now, Fiona Irvine there. Let's talk now to John Stewart, who is from the Home Builders Federation. He joins me from our studios in Tunbridge Wells. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
I don't think anyone wants new properties to be built on land that is liable to flooding, do they? I mean, can you explain to viewers where the responsibility lies?
Well, could I just correct the report that you just ran from Roger Harrabin? It's a completely inaccurate report of the situation. House builders are not resisting measures to minimise flood risk. That's not the case at all. There have been regulations in place since 2006 which require house builders to, first of all, assess the flood risk on a site, and secondly, to take measures to ensure that doesn't happen. Secondly, local authorities control where housing is built, and also in a government agency called the Environment Agency control where housing is built. So there is no way that house builders can just willy-nilly go and build in floodplains. It's very, very heavily regulated, and they must take measures to ensure that there's no contribution to flood risk.
And do you feel those regulations work? I mean, are there ever new developments that, for whatever reason, do get built somewhere that's perhaps not ideal, or are the regulations absolutely spot on?
I know of no evidence to suggest that the regulations are not working, and in the rare occasions where there is building in floodplain, there are pretty stringent measures imposed on the house builder, whether it's measures with the actual flow of water or on the site, perhaps a flood wall or foundations. But I stress that that's very much a rare case. Could I just pick up too on the point about the April date that you mentioned? That has nothing to do with putting in place flood mitigation measures. That is only about who will be responsible for the long-term maintenance of what are called sustainable urban drainage systems. It's nothing to do with whether those sustainable urban drainage systems are done or not. They are done. They have been required since 2006. And
so you are confident that if any new properties, new developments are built from today going forward, that they are... Just talk us through again, going back to the beginning, whose responsibility it is. Where does the final decision lie as to whether that land is appropriate, safe, if there's any risk that the house builders will do their utmost to minimise the risks?
Ultimately, that responsibility lies with the local authority, who is has the ability to grant planning permission or not, and with an agency called the Environment Agency. And if they have serious concerns that housing shouldn't be built in a particular location, whatever the house builder might think, they can oppose that housing development. So the idea that house builders have carte blanche to do this is completely wrong. There are public agencies which have control over this.
All right. John Stewart from the Home Builders Federation, thanks very much for joining us. Thank you.
Now, extremists found guilty of training as terrorists could face